A 6-year-old boy waves goodbye to his father in the school parking lot on a Wednesday morning in May, his Spider-Man backpack bouncing as he runs toward his kindergarten teacher. And that is the last time anyone who loved him would ever see him again. Before we dive into this haunting story, leave a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Vanishing Vaz Network, because tomorrow we uncover another case that will stay with you long after the screen fades to black. Aurora, Illinois. A quiet suburb nestled about 40 miles west of Chicago, where the Fox River carves its way through the heart of a community built on the promise of middle-class stability. It's the kind of place where neighbors wave from their driveways, where children ride their bikes until the streetlights flicker on, where families trust that the rhythms of ordinary life will hold. It was here, in a modest home on North Highland Avenue, that 6-year-old Timothy James Pitzen lived with his parents, James and Amy. To those who knew him, Timothy was an explosion of energy wrapped in a child's body. He had brown hair that never quite stayed in place, brown eyes that sparkled with mischief, and a smile that could light up any room he entered. His grandmother, Linda Pitzen, would later describe him as a wonderful little boy, full of life and always happy. Timothy loved all the things a 6-year-old should love. He was obsessed with Spider-Man, carried a backpack emblazoned with his hero's image, and spent hours playing with his collection of Matchbox cars. He adored trips to the zoo with his family, pizza from Chuck E. Cheese, and the Happy Meals from McDonald's that came with toys he would treasure. He was learning to swim, mastering the backstroke in lessons his parents had enrolled him in, and he took to it with the same fearless enthusiasm he brought to everything else. At Greenman Elementary School in West Aurora, Timothy was known as an outgoing child, a natural leader who made friends easily. His kindergarten teacher, Cheryl Broach, watched him run into her classroom each morning with a wave and a smile. He was one of those kids, she would later recall, who always had a smile on his face. A happy kid. A genuinely happy kid. But to understand what happened to Timothy, we have to understand the woman who gave him that extra letter in his name, who wanted her son to be special from the very beginning. We have to understand Amy Joan Marie Fry Pitzen. Amy was born on May 3, 1968 in Libertyville, Iowa, a small town where everyone knew everyone, and secrets were hard to keep. She was raised by Lee and Alana Anderson Fry, and by all accounts, she grew into a bright, outgoing young woman who graduated from Libertyville High School and went on to earn a degree from Iowa State University. But beneath Amy's vivacious exterior, there were shadows. She struggled with depression from a young age, darkness that would follow her throughout her life. By the time she was in her early 20s, she had already experienced her first failed marriage. Her first husband, Michael Natonsky, divorced her in 1991. Though he would later describe her as someone who could be the life of the party one moment and withdrawn the next. Amy's second marriage was to a man named Greg Campbell. They wed in 1995, and for a time, things seemed stable. But during an argument one night, Amy did something that would foreshadow the tragedy to come. She parked her car on the railroad tracks in Ames, Iowa, and attempted suicide. Before a train could pass, she managed to get off the tracks and checked herself into a psychiatric ward for nearly a week. When she was released, she was prescribed antidepressants, but according to Campbell, she stopped taking them around the time of their divorce in 2000. After Campbell, there was a third husband, a third divorce. The pattern was becoming clear to those who knew Amy well. She was searching for something: stability, happiness, a sense of belonging, and she couldn't seem to find it. Then, in 2002, at a going-away party in Ames, Iowa, Amy met James Pitzen. Jim, as everyone called him, was different from the men Amy had known before. He was a regular guy, the kind who enjoyed watching the Blackhawks, fixing up old cars, and grabbing a quiet beer with a friend. He was born and raised in Clinton, Iowa, a working-class town on the banks of the Mississippi River, and he carried with him the steady, unpretentious values of that upbringing. Jim had his own struggles. He had battled Hodgkin's lymphoma and won, though the chemotherapy left him uncertain whether he could ever father children. When he met Amy, he was drawn to her energy, her spontaneity, her ability to make him laugh. She was unlike anyone he had ever known. They began dating long distance. Early in their relationship, Amy revealed her struggles with depression. Jim believed that a healthy, stable relationship could help her manage her demons. He thought love could be enough. In 2003, Jim received a terrifying phone call. Amy had taken pills and was found at the edge of a cliff in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. She had apparently passed out and fallen, but survived. It was her second known suicide attempt. The call shook Jim, but it didn't drive him away. If anything, it deepened his commitment to helping her find her footing. The following year, something unexpected happened. Amy became pregnant. Despite Jim's fears that the chemotherapy might have left him sterile, they were going to have a child. It felt like a miracle, a second chance at life for both of them. On October 18, 2004, Timothy James Pitzen was born. Amy chose the spelling of his name herself, adding that extra M because she wanted it to be a little different from Timothy. She wanted her son to stand out, to be special from his very first breath. For Amy, motherhood was transformative. Her mother, Alana Anderson, would later say that Amy just adored that little boy, and he just adored her. The bond between mother and son was immediate and intense. Timothy became the center of Amy's universe, the one constant source of light in a life that had known so much darkness. Jim and Amy married shortly before Timothy's birth. They settled into a home in Aurora, Illinois, and for a time, life took on the shape of normalcy. Jim worked in the area, Amy found employment with a property management company, and Timothy grew from an infant into a curious, energetic toddler who loved to explore the world around him. But the shadows in Amy's life didn't disappear. They merely waited. By 2008, cracks had begun to show in the Pitzen marriage. Jim and Amy argued frequently about money, about Amy's desire to travel alone with friends, about the small resentments that accumulate in any relationship under strain. Amy's depression flared up, and she began talking about divorce. Then Jim discovered something that shattered his trust. Amy had been in secret contact with one of her ex-husbands. They had met for lunch a few times, and there were plans to meet again while Jim was out of town. Confronted with the evidence, Jim issued an ultimatum. "Make your choice," he told her. "You can be married to me, or you can go back to him. But if you choose him, I will fight for custody of Timothy. And given your history, I will win." Of all the harsh words spoken in their troubled marriage, this one struck Amy the hardest. According to her sister, Cara Jacobs, Amy's greatest fear was that a judge would take Timothy away from her because of her mental health issues. The threat of losing custody of her son was the one thing she could not bear. Amy chose to stay with Jim, but something fundamental had shifted. The marriage continued, but it was wounded in ways that would never fully heal. And the fear that Jim might one day follow through on his threat, that she might lose her son, took root in Amy's mind and began to grow. The years passed. Timothy started school at Greenman Elementary, where he thrived. He made friends easily, loved learning, and came home each day bursting with stories about what he had done and seen. His room was filled with his Matchbox cars, his Spider-Man memorabilia, the accumulated treasures of a happy childhood. But at home, the tension between his parents remained. Jim and Amy continued to argue. Amy's depression continued to cycle through periods of remission and relapse, and the fear of losing custody, of losing Timothy, continued to haunt her. In early May 2011, Amy took a trip to the Bahamas with her best friend. It was an annual vacation, a chance for the two women to get away and enjoy themselves. Jim was unhappy about being excluded, but Amy insisted. When she returned, she seemed better, happier, more like her old self. Jim thought maybe things were turning around. He had no way of knowing that his wife was making plans that she shared with no one, plans that would shatter his life and leave questions that might never be answered. What investigators would later discover was chilling in its implications. In the months before Timothy's disappearance, Amy had made at least 2 unexplained trips to the Sterling and Rock Falls area of northwestern Illinois. Her iPass records showed the visits, but no one in her life knew why she had gone there or whom she might have met. The trips were a secret, part of a design that was taking shape in her mind. She had also created a secret email account under her maiden name, one that Jim knew nothing about. Police would later examine the account and find it contained mostly spam, but the fact of its existence suggested that Amy was capable of maintaining hidden parts of her life, of planning things that no one around her suspected. Wednesday, May 11th, 2011, began like any other morning in the Pitzen household. Jim woke early, showered, and prepared for work. Amy had come home sick from her job the previous day, and Jim had arranged to arrive late so he could drop Timothy off at school and take Amy to her office to retrieve her car, which she had left there. At around 7:45, Jim pulled the family Jeep into the drop-off lane at Greenman Elementary School. Timothy sat in the back seat, dressed in green shorts and a t-shirt, his Spider-Man backpack ready for the day. The boy hopped out of the vehicle, turned and waved. "Love you, Dad," he called out. "Love you too, buddy," Jim replied. "I'll see you in a little bit." Jim watched his son run toward the school entrance, the backpack bouncing with each step. Timothy did that little waddle run, Jim would later recall, like a chubby old man. He ran off to his teacher, and it was all good. That image, Timothy running toward school, waving goodbye, would become the last clear memory Jim would have of his son. A moment frozen in time, replayed endlessly in the years that followed. After dropping Timothy off, Jim drove Amy to her workplace so she could pick up her car. They kissed goodbye. "I love you," Amy said. "I love you too," Jim replied. And then he watched her walk into the building. He didn't notice anything unusual about her demeanor. She seemed fine, normal. Perhaps a little tired from being sick, but nothing that raised alarm bells. He went to work, expecting to see both his wife and son that evening. He would never see his son again. What Jim didn't know, what no one knew, was that Amy had not taken her antidepressant medication that morning. And sometime between when Jim dropped her off and the start of Timothy's school day, she had made a decision that she had perhaps been contemplating for weeks or months, a decision that she would carry out with methodical precision over the next 3 days. At 8:10 in the morning, less than half an hour after Jim had watched his son run into school, Amy Fry Pitzen walked into the main office of Greenman Elementary. She told the staff that there was a family emergency and that she needed to check Timothy out of class. The school followed its standard procedures. They retrieved Timothy from his kindergarten classroom. His teacher, Cheryl Broach, watched him gather his things and walk toward the office. He turned at the clock and waved. "See you tomorrow," he said, his voice bright with the confidence of a child who had no reason to doubt that tomorrow would come. "See you, Timothy," Cheryl replied. She would never see him again. By 10 o'clock that morning, Amy and Timothy had arrived at an auto repair shop. Amy's 2004 Ford Expedition, a blue SUV, needed some work done, and she dropped it off with the mechanics. An employee of the shop offered to drive Amy and Timothy to their next destination, the Brookfield Zoo, about 25 miles east of Aurora. The zoo was one of Timothy's favorite places. He loved the animals, loved running from exhibit to exhibit with boundless energy, loved the hot dogs and ice cream sold at the concession stands. For any child, it would have been a dream day. Pulled out of school early to spend the day at the zoo with Mom. Security cameras at Brookfield Zoo captured footage of Amy and Timothy moving through the grounds. In the grainy images, they look like any mother and son enjoying a day out. Timothy appears happy, energetic, completely at ease. There is nothing in the footage to suggest that anything is wrong. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Amy and Timothy returned to the auto shop to pick up the repaired SUV. But instead of driving home to Aurora, Amy headed north. By late afternoon, they had arrived at Key Lime Cove Resort in Gurnee, Illinois, about 45 miles north of Aurora. Key Lime Cove was an indoor water park attached to a hotel, the kind of place that was paradise for a 6-year-old. There were water slides and wave pools, splash pads and lazy rivers. Timothy could have spent hours there, and by all indications, he did. Security footage from Key Lime Cove shows Amy and Timothy walking through the resort around 3:15 in the afternoon, heading toward an elevator. Amy is carrying a bag. Timothy is beside her, looking around with the curiosity of a child in a new and exciting place. They checked into a room and spent the night. Meanwhile, back in Aurora, Jim Pitzen was growing concerned. The school day at Greenman Elementary was a half day. Jim had planned to pick Timothy up at 10:30 in the morning. When he arrived at the school, he was told that his son wasn't there, that Amy had checked him out hours earlier, citing a family emergency. Jim was confused. What family emergency? He called Amy's cell phone. No answer. He called again. Still nothing. He tried her workplace, called family members, sent text messages. All his attempts to reach her went unanswered. By that evening, Jim was in a state of controlled panic. He had no idea where his wife and son were, and Amy wasn't responding to any of his attempts to contact her. Something was very wrong. The next morning, Thursday, May 12th, Jim reported Amy and Timothy missing to the Aurora Police Department. The police immediately entered their names into a national database, alerting law enforcement agencies across the country to be on the lookout for the missing mother and child. But Amy and Timothy weren't missing in the way that missing persons usually are. They weren't lost or abducted by strangers. Amy knew exactly where they were and exactly where they were going. On Thursday, after checking out of Key Lime Cove, Amy drove Timothy north to the Wisconsin Dells, a resort area famous for its water parks about 160 miles from Aurora. Along the way, she stopped at a convenience store and bought some clothes, a toy car, and a craft kit for Timothy. She filled the SUV with gas near Johnson Creek, Wisconsin. Around 2:20 in the afternoon, she purchased gas and drinks off Interstate 94. By the afternoon, they had arrived at the Kalahari Resort, an enormous water park complex that was even bigger and more elaborate than Key Lime Cove. They checked in around 3:40 in the afternoon, and Timothy spent the evening doing what any 6-year-old would do in such a place: splashing, sliding, laughing, completely unaware that anything was amiss. Back home, Jim's attempts to locate his family were growing more desperate. He had contacted Amy's relatives, her friends, anyone who might know where she had gone. No one had heard from her. No one knew anything. Finally, on Friday, May 13th, Amy broke her silence, but not to Jim. Sometime between noon and 1:30 in the afternoon, Amy made a series of cell phone calls. She called her mother, Alana Anderson. She called Jim's brother. She called other family members. In each conversation, she insisted that she and Timothy were fine, that they were not in danger, that she just needed some time alone. During the call to Jim's brother, Amy said something that would later take on a darker significance. "Timothy is fine," she said. "Timothy belongs to me. Timothy and I will be fine. Timothy is safe." Timothy could be heard in the background during some of these calls. He sounded normal, happy even. At one point, he said he was hungry, the kind of thing any child would say after a day of playing. He didn't sound scared. He didn't sound like he was in distress. He just sounded like a kid who wanted lunch. He even spoke briefly with one of the relatives. His voice was cheerful, untroubled. There was nothing in his tone to suggest that anything was wrong. These phone calls would be the last time anyone heard Timothy Pitzen's voice. Cell phone records would later reveal that these calls were made from somewhere near Sterling, Illinois, in the northwestern part of the state, about 80 miles west of Aurora. The final call pinged a tower about 5 miles northwest of Sterling, near Illinois, Route 40. What Amy and Timothy were doing in that area, and how long they had been there, remains unknown. The surveillance footage from the Kalahari Resort shows Amy and Timothy checking out the next morning, Friday, May 13th, at around 11:15. In the grainy images, Timothy is holding his mother's hand. He appears bored with waiting in line, shifting his weight from foot to foot, the way children do when they're impatient. Amy is carrying his backpack. This footage would become the last confirmed visual sighting of Timothy Pitzen. The last proof that he was alive. What happened in the hours after they left the Kalahari Resort remains the central mystery of this case. The hours between the morning checkout and Amy's next confirmed appearance are a blank space in the timeline, a void that investigators have spent years trying to fill. What we know is this. At some point that day, Amy drove south from Wisconsin into Illinois. She traveled along Interstate 39 and Interstate 88, heading toward the Sterling and Rock Falls area where she had made those phone calls. Cell phone records and iPass data confirmed her route, but they couldn't tell investigators where she stopped or what she did. The area around Sterling and Rock Falls is rural, dotted with farms and small towns, crisscrossed by secondary roads that wind through fields and forests. It's the kind of place where someone could stop, pull off onto a gravel road, and not be seen by another soul for hours. It's the kind of place where secrets could be kept. After making her calls to family members around 1:30 in the afternoon, Amy turned off her cell phone. The digital trail went dark. For the next 6 hours, there is no record of where she was or what she was doing. At 7:25 in the evening, Amy was captured on security cameras at a Family Dollar store in Winnebago, Illinois, a small town about 15 miles north of Rockford. She was alone. She purchased a pen, notepaper, and envelopes, items you would use to write letters. Half an hour later, at 8 o'clock, she was seen at a Sullivan's Foods grocery store in the same town. Again, she was alone. Timothy was nowhere to be seen. Between the morning checkout at the Kalahari and the evening sightings in Winnebago, roughly 9 hours had passed. During those hours, something happened. Something that Amy would never explain, and that investigators might never fully understand. Where was Timothy during those 9 hours? What happened to him between the water park and the stores in Winnebago? These questions have haunted investigators, family members, and true crime enthusiasts for over a decade. The answers remain maddeningly elusive. At 11:15 that night, Amy checked into the Rockford Inn, a modest 2-story motel on Route 20 on the south side of Rockford, Illinois. The motel was functional, but far from fancy, the kind of place truckers and travelers stopped for a cheap night's rest. It was not the kind of place you would take a child. When Amy checked in, she appeared to be alone. No one at the motel reported seeing a small boy with her. She was assigned room 108. She double-locked the door and secured the chain. And sometime during that night or early the next morning, Amy Fry Pitzen took her own life. She slashed her wrists and neck with a box cutter. She also overdosed on antihistamines. Investigators found a partially consumed bottle of Triaminic, a children's cold medicine, in the room. In her final moments, she tried to rise from the bathtub, where she had been bleeding, took 1 or 2 steps toward the sink, and collapsed. At 12:30 in the afternoon on Saturday, May 14, 2011, a maid at the Rockford Inn came to clean room 108. She knocked twice, got no response, and used her key to open the door. Even with the security chain still in place, she could see Amy's body lying on the bathroom floor. All that was left was the final beats of her heart, the motel's manager would later say. Timothy was not in the room. There was no sign that he had ever been there. But there was something else. On the nightstand, beside a bottle of water and a flyer from the Wisconsin Dells, investigators found a handwritten note. 5 sentences that would define the search for Timothy Pitzen for years to come. The note read, "Some people leave notes and some don't. I couldn't decide, so this is my version. Tim is somewhere safe with people who love him and will take care of him. You will never find him." And then a final line, addressed to whoever would find her body. "To whoever finds me, sorry about the mess." When Rockford police identified Amy's body, her name triggered an alert in the system. She had been reported missing out of Aurora, along with her 6-year-old son. Officers immediately contacted the Aurora Police Department. The case that had begun as a missing persons report was now something far more sinister. Detectives descended on room 108. They photographed the scene, collected evidence, and searched for any clue that might reveal what had happened to Timothy. They found Amy's purse and identification. They found the box cutter she had used to end her life. They found the children's cold medicine. But they did not find Timothy's Spider-Man backpack. They did not find his toys. They did not find his car seat. They did not find any evidence that a child had been in that room. The knife that Amy had used to take her own life was tested for blood. It contained only her blood. Whatever had happened to Timothy, there was no evidence that he had been harmed in that motel room. But what did that mean? Was he alive somewhere, as Amy's note suggested? Or had something happened to him in those missing hours something that Amy had concealed before driving to Rockford to end her own life. The note was both a promise and a taunt. "Timothy was safe," it said, "but you will never find him." In the days that followed, 2 more letters arrived, not at the motel, but in the mailboxes of Amy's mother and her best friend. Amy had mailed them before checking into the Rockford Inn, knowing they would arrive after she was gone. The letter to her mother, Alana Anderson, contained a message that echoed the note found in the motel room. "I've taken him somewhere safe," Amy wrote. "He will be well cared for, and he says that he loves you. Please know that there is nothing that you could have said or done that would have changed my mind." To her friend, Amy wrote about her struggles with mental health, about feeling like she had never truly belonged in the world. She wrote that for a long time, she had felt that she belonged with Timothy. But in the end, even that wasn't enough. The letters offered no clue to Timothy's whereabouts. They offered no explanation for what had happened during those missing 9 hours. They offered only the terrible certainty that Amy had planned this, had known exactly what she was doing, and had taken her secrets with her to the grave. The search for Timothy Pitzen began immediately and expanded rapidly. Aurora Police, working in coordination with law enforcement agencies across Illinois, Wisconsin, and Iowa, launched a massive effort to find the missing boy. They retraced Amy's route from Aurora to the Wisconsin Dells and back, interviewing employees at every hotel, restaurant, and gas station along the way. They distributed flyers with Timothy's photograph to every rest stop and truck stop in the region. The investigation focused heavily on the Sterling and Rock Falls area, where Amy's cell phone had pinged during her calls to family members. Police believed this was the most likely location where something had happened to Timothy, where Amy had either left him with someone or where something terrible had occurred. On May 19th, more than 70 officers from Aurora and local police departments fanned out across the Dixon, Sterling, and Rock Falls area. They searched interstates, secondary roads, rest stops, and rural areas for 5 hours. They found nothing. Investigators interviewed dozens of people who had known Amy, friends, family members, co-workers, acquaintances. They examined her computers, her emails, her phone records, her financial documents. They searched for any connection she might have had to the Sterling area, any person she might have known there, any reason she would have made those unexplained trips in the months before Timothy disappeared. They found almost nothing useful. Amy had kept her plans hidden even from those closest to her. Whatever she had intended to do with Timothy, she had shared it with no one. Amy's 2004 Ford Expedition was found in the parking lot of the Rockford Inn after her body was discovered. When investigators examined it, they found that it was visibly dirty, with soil, tall grass, and weeds stuck to the undercarriage. The vehicle had clearly been driven off-road at some point during Amy's 3-day journey. Inside the SUV, investigators found a concerning amount of blood in the back seat. Testing confirmed that the blood belonged to Timothy. The discovery sent a chill through the investigation. Had Amy harmed her son? Was this evidence of violence? But family members offered an alternative explanation. Timothy had suffered a bloody nose while riding in the SUV about a year before his disappearance. The blood in the back seat could have been from that incident, not from anything that happened during the 3 days he was missing. Investigators also tested the knife that Amy had used to take her own life. Only her blood was found on the blade. There was no physical evidence that she had used it to harm Timothy. The ambiguity was agonizing. The blood could have been from a nosebleed. The knife showed no signs of harming the child. Amy's note said Timothy was safe with people who loved him. But none of that explained where he was or what had happened to him. One of the most tantalizing leads came from the soil and plant material found on Amy's SUV. Investigators sent samples to Microtrace, a private forensic laboratory in Elgin, Illinois, that specialized in trace evidence analysis. The scientists at Microtrace examined the dirt, the grass, the weeds, the tiny fragments of material that clung to the undercarriage of the vehicle. What they found was intriguing. Based on the sediments and plant material, the scientists concluded that the Ford Expedition had been stopped for an unknown period of time on a wide gravel shoulder or gravel road, adjacent to, or just off, an asphalt secondary road that had been treated with glass road marking beads. Near this gravel area, the vehicle had backed into a grassy meadow or field that was nearly treeless. There were birch and oak trees in the general vicinity, but not directly over the spot where the SUV had stopped. Queen Anne's lace and black mustard plants were growing in a row nearby. The scientists also found something unexpected in the soil, a mineral called anhydrite. This was unusual, and the presence of this mineral helped narrow down the geographic area where the vehicle might have stopped. Based on their analysis, Microtrace concluded that the meadow was most likely in northwestern Illinois, with Lee and Whiteside counties as the most probable locations. However, areas in Carroll, Ogle, Stevenson, and Winnebago counties could not be ruled out. It was a promising lead, but the area in question covered hundreds of square miles of rural land, far too large for police to conduct a comprehensive ground search. Without more specific information, the soil analysis could point investigators in a general direction, but it couldn't tell them exactly where Amy had stopped or what she had done there. The months passed. The investigation continued, but leads were scarce. Thousands of tips poured in from across the country. People who thought they had seen Timothy at a grocery store, at a park, at a school. Each tip was investigated, and each one turned out to be a dead end. 6 months after Timothy's disappearance, the Aurora Police Department released new surveillance footage showing Amy and Timothy at Key Lime Cove and the Kalahari Resort. They hoped the footage would jog someone's memory, would prompt a witness to come forward with information about what they had seen. No one did. In August 2011, investigators discovered that Amy had created a secret email account under her maiden name, separate from the Yahoo account she shared with Jim. The discovery raised hopes that the account might contain evidence of her plans, communications with whoever might have taken Timothy. But when police examined the account, they found it was mostly spam. Deleted emails could not be recovered because Yahoo did not maintain those records. Whatever secrets the account might have held were lost. The investigation had reached an impasse. Amy was dead. Her note claimed Timothy was safe. But there was no evidence of who might have him, where he might be, or whether he was even still alive. Jim Pitzen learned of his wife's death from 2 Aurora police detectives who came to his door on May 14, 2011. "We found Amy deceased," one of the detectives said. Jim stared at them, trying to process the words. His wife was dead. But even as that terrible reality began to sink in, another thought pushed its way to the front of his mind. "Where's Tim?" The detectives looked at each other, then back at Jim. "We don't know," one said. "He wasn't there." Jim stood in his doorway, numb. His wife was dead. His son was missing. The life he had known was over. In the weeks that followed, Jim tried to stay in the Aurora home. For all the tragedy associated with it, the small house with the wood-railed front porch still held cherished memories. Tim playing with his Matchbox cars, circling the driveway on his bike, cuddling with his gray cat, goofing around in the yard with the family's black lab. Jim had been building Timothy a treehouse in the backyard. Now he couldn't bear to look at it, couldn't bring himself to finish what he had started. The bad memories crowded out the good. Every room reminded him of what he had lost. Every toy, every photograph, every piece of clothing that still carried his son's scent. Eventually, Jim couldn't take it anymore. He left Aurora and moved back to Clinton, Iowa, the town where he had grown up. He retreated to a house on a dirt road outside of town, surrounded by the rusting hulks of old vehicles he had taken on as projects. Things to tinker with. Things to occupy his hands and his mind so he wouldn't have to think about the emptiness. "I miss my son," Jim told reporters in the months after Timothy's disappearance. "I wish he was here." Jim adopted a dog, a black lab mix named Bailey, hoping that someday Timothy would come home, and the boy and the dog could meet. In interviews over the years, Jim has maintained his belief that Timothy is alive. He doesn't believe that Amy would have harmed their son. She was the one person Timothy adored, and she adored him back. Whatever darkness had consumed her in the end, Jim couldn't imagine her hurting the boy who meant everything to her. Timothy was the apple of her eye, Jim has said. Timothy made her a better mom. Timothy was one person that she would never do anything to. But if Timothy is alive, where is he? And why hasn't he come home? Jim has a theory, one that he has shared with police but is reluctant to discuss in detail. He believes that Amy found someone willing to take Timothy, perhaps a family she had met during those unexplained trips to the Sterling area, perhaps someone from her past in Iowa. He believes his son might be living off the grid somewhere, raised by people who don't know or don't care that a father is searching for him. Maybe he's in the middle of nowhere, Jim has speculated. Maybe he has no cell phone, no television, no computer. Maybe he's getting homeschooled. Maybe the people who have him don't watch the news. Or perhaps, Jim has suggested, Amy took Timothy overseas. Perhaps he's in another country entirely, beyond the reach of American law enforcement. These are theories, nothing more. But for a father who has spent over a decade not knowing whether his son is alive or dead, theories are sometimes all you have. In my whole mind, Jim has said, I know he's here, somewhere. He has imagined the reunion countless times. In the early years, he pictured Timothy running up to him, throwing his arms around his father in a hug. Now, with Timothy in his 20s, Jim imagines something different. I'm going to shake his hand, Jim says. He's a man now. At this point, Jim has acknowledged, I think Timothy will find me before I find him. And so he waits, in his house, in Clinton, Iowa, surrounded by memories and hope and the crushing weight of uncertainty. He waits for a phone call, a knock on the door, some sign that his son is still out there and wants to come home. The wait has lasted more than 13 years. It may last the rest of his life. On April 3rd, 2019, nearly 8 years after Timothy Pitzen disappeared, a woman in Newport, Kentucky, a small city just across the Ohio River from Cincinnati, spotted a young man wandering the streets. He looked disheveled, agitated, disoriented. He approached her car and knocked on the window. "Can you help me?" he asked. "I just want to get home. Please help me." The woman asked what was wrong. The young man told her he had been kidnapped when he was 6 years old and had been held captive for 7 years, passed around between different people, sexually and physically abused. He said he had finally escaped from a nearby motel and run across a bridge into Kentucky. His name, he said, was Timothy Pitzen. The woman called 911. When police arrived, the young man repeated his story. He said he had been held at a Red Roof Inn by two men who looked like bodybuilders with tattoos and dark complexions. He said he had escaped while his captors weren't watching and had run to freedom. The news spread like wildfire. Timothy Pitzen, the missing Aurora boy whose case had captivated the nation 8 years earlier, had been found. He was alive. He had escaped his captors. The nightmare was finally over, except it wasn't. FBI agents from Cincinnati and Louisville were called in to investigate. They interviewed the young man, taking detailed notes about his claims. They asked him to describe his captors, the motel where he had been held, the years he had spent in captivity. Almost immediately, the agents sensed something was wrong. The young man's story didn't add up. He claimed to be 14 years old, but he looked older. He refused to be fingerprinted, saying he had been conditioned by his captors to resist such procedures. His descriptions of his kidnapping and years in captivity were vague and inconsistent. The agents took a cheek swab for DNA testing and sent it to the FBI laboratory for analysis. The results came back the next day. The young man's DNA did not match Timothy Pitzen's family. He was not Timothy. His name was Brian Michael Rini. He was 23 years old, from Medina, Ohio. He had been released from prison just a month earlier, after serving 14 months for burglary and vandalism. When confronted with the DNA evidence, Rini admitted he was not Timothy Pitzen. He told investigators he had learned about Timothy's case from an episode of ABC's 2020 that had aired earlier that year. He said he wanted to get away from his own family. He said he wished he had a father like Timothy's. The revelation was devastating for the Pitzen family. For a brief, shining moment, they had allowed themselves to believe that the long nightmare was over, that Timothy was coming home. "It's like reliving that day all over again," said Kara Jacobs, Timothy's aunt. And Timothy's father is devastated once again. Jim Pitzen, who had been preparing himself for a reunion with his son, retreated to his bedroom in Clinton, Iowa, with the shades drawn to avoid the media clamor outside. His mother told relatives that he was shattered. For Jim, the hoax was like ripping off a scab. The wound that had begun to heal was torn open again, raw and bleeding. "It's just painful," Jim later said. "Now you've got to wait for the scab to heal." Brian Rini was charged with making false statements to federal agents and aggravated identity theft. At his sentencing in December 2020, he apologized to the Pitzen family. "I wish that I could just take it back," he said. "I am sorry to the family." He was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison. The prosecutor, Kyle Healy, had harsh words for Rini. "He needs to understand that when he tells lies like this, it does cause damage," Healy said. "It hurts people, it hurts their families, and it takes law enforcement away from their very serious job of helping children who have been sex trafficked." For the Pitzen family, the Rini hoax was a cruel reminder that their search was far from over. The media attention faded, the reporters went home, and they were left once again with the same unanswered questions they had been living with for years. Where is Timothy? Is he alive? Will we ever find him? In the years since Timothy Pitzen's disappearance, investigators and amateur sleuths alike have developed various theories about what might have happened to him. None of these theories has been proven, and the truth remains unknown. But each offers a possible explanation for one of the most baffling missing persons cases in recent American history. The first theory, and the one that Timothy's family desperately wants to believe, is that Amy followed through on what her suicide note promised. She found someone willing to take Timothy, perhaps a couple who couldn't have children, perhaps someone she had met during her unexplained trips to northwestern Illinois, perhaps someone from her past in Iowa. In this scenario, Amy believed she was protecting Timothy. She knew she was going to take her own life, and she didn't want her son to grow up with the legacy of suicide, with the stigma of having a mother who had abandoned him in the most final way possible. So she found what she considered a better alternative, a new family who would love him and care for him, who would raise him without the shadow of his mother's mental illness hanging over him. Timothy's aunt, Kara Jacobs, has been one of the strongest advocates for this theory. I believe, to the core of my being, that Amy knew what she was going to do to herself, Kara has said. And I think in her way, by giving him to another family, she thought Tim would be loved and cared for by what she would consider a normal, loving family and not have to grow up with this stigma. Kara believes the answer may lie in Iowa, where Amy spent time living with her grandparents in the 1990s. The route Amy took on her final day, south from the Wisconsin Dells toward the Sterling area, then potentially west toward Dubuque, Iowa, traces a path that Kara and Amy traveled together as children, visiting family. Amy actually lived with my grandparents for a period of time in the 90s, Kara has said. She met people in Iowa. I believe that whatever happened was a connection she made there. If this theory is correct, then Timothy might be alive today, living under a different name, perhaps unaware of his true identity, or the family that is searching for him. He would be in his 20s now, an adult who might have vague memories of a different life, a different family, a father who told him he loved him on a Wednesday morning in May. The second theory is darker, and it's one that Timothy's family refuses to accept. Some investigators have privately speculated that Amy may have harmed Timothy before taking her own life, a murder-suicide scenario, in which she decided that if she couldn't be with her son, no one else could either. There is circumstantial evidence that could support this theory. The blood found in the back seat of Amy's SUV, though attributed to a nosebleed, could have had another origin. The 9 hours between the Kalahari checkout and Amy's appearance at the stores in Winnebago are unaccounted for, plenty of time for something terrible to happen. The rural areas around Sterling, with their isolated fields and forests, would provide ample opportunity to conceal a body that might never be found. But there is also evidence against this theory. The knife Amy used to take her own life contained only her blood. There were no signs of violence in the motel room, and everyone who knew Amy, her family, her friends, even investigators who have studied the case, agrees on one point. Amy loved Timothy more than anything in the world. The idea that she would harm him is almost unthinkable. Every person I've talked to has said Amy would never hurt Timothy, said Aurora Police Detective Lee Katavu. Therein lies the mystery. No one in her life has been aware of her falling off the grid before, or having unaccounted for blocks of time when she might have been able to accomplish this. Jim Pitzen, despite everything, refuses to believe that his wife harmed their son. She would never do anything to hurt him, he has said repeatedly. No, never. The third theory is perhaps the most disturbing of all, that Amy's note was a lie, that there are no people taking care of Timothy, that Amy in the grip of whatever darkness had consumed her, wanted to hurt Jim in the most devastating way possible, by taking away the one thing he loved most and ensuring he would never know what happened. In her note to Jim, which was not made public, but which Jim has alluded to in interviews, Amy apparently made derogatory comments about him. Loser type of things, Jim has said. She was angry at me and she took it out. She took everything away from me that day. She made a very, very big point that I'm gonna hurt you worse than you hurt me. If this theory is correct, then the note promising that Timothy is safe with people who love him might be the cruelest lie of all. A final act of revenge designed to torture Jim with false hope for the rest of his life. Each of these theories has its adherents. None of them has been proven. And until Timothy is found, alive or dead, the truth will remain as elusive as the boy himself. More than 13 years have passed since Timothy Pitzen disappeared. In that time, the world has changed in ways that no one could have predicted. Technologies have advanced, social media has transformed how information spreads, and a generation of children who were Timothy's age in 2011 have grown into adults. But the search for Timothy has never stopped. The Aurora Police Department continues to investigate the case, following up on tips that still come in from around the country. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children has released multiple age progression images, showing what Timothy might look like at various ages: 13, 16, 19. Each image is an attempt to keep his face in the public eye, to remind people that somewhere, a boy who was taken from his kindergarten classroom is now a young man who might be walking among us. In 2024, on the 13th anniversary of Timothy's disappearance, his father released a public message to his son. Dear Timothy, the years apart have been hard. I am so looking forward to us being reunited. There is so much of your young life I have not been able to be a part of while you have been missing. The future is bright, and I look forward to spending time with you and getting to know my son again, till I see you again. Jim Pitzen is now in his late 50s. He still lives in Clinton, Iowa, in the house on the dirt road, surrounded by the memories he cannot let go of. The walls of his living room are covered with photographs of Timothy as a baby, as a toddler, as a kindergartner with a Spider-Man backpack. He still keeps Timothy's room the way it was. He still has the toys, the Matchbox cars, the go-kart that Timothy used to ride in the driveway. He still has Bailey, the dog he adopted, hoping that one day his son would come home to meet her. I know he's out there, Jim says, and somewhere else, it's just a matter of time before I find him, or he finds me. Timothy's grandmother, Alana Anderson, keeps a green journal in which she writes letters to her missing grandson. She records memories of him, funny things he said, silly things he did. She writes about how much he is loved, how hard the family has searched, how much they want him to come home. He's out there, Alana has said, and I think, when he's old enough, he'll find us. At Greenman Elementary School, where Timothy spent his kindergarten year, a memorial garden was planted in his honor. It bears no nameplate, and few of the children who play there today know the story behind it. But for those who remember, it is a quiet tribute to a boy who walked out of school one Wednesday morning and never returned. Timothy's aunt, Kara Jacobs, continues to advocate for her nephew's case. She has appeared at missing persons conferences, given interviews to reporters, and used social media to keep Timothy's story in the public consciousness. One day, we are going to see him, Kara has said, and you're going to see the other side of the story. and that's going to be amazing. The family holds on to hope, even as the years pass and the odds of finding Timothy grow longer. They believe he is alive. They believe he will be found. They believe that someday the phone will ring or there will be a knock on the door, and the long nightmare will finally be over. But they also live with the terrible uncertainty that has defined their lives since May 11th, 2011. The not knowing, the endless questions, the silence that stretches on and on. If Timothy is alive, he would be 20 years old now, old enough to vote, to drive, to live on his own, old enough to have memories of his early childhood, of the father who dropped him off at school and told him he loved him, of the life he left behind. Does he know who he really is? Does he remember the house in Aurora, the Matchbox cars, the Spider-Man backpack? Does he know that a father in Iowa is waiting for him, has been waiting for him for over a decade? Or has he been raised believing a different story, living a different life, unaware that somewhere a family is searching for him? These are questions that may never be answered. The mystery of Timothy Pitzen remains unsolved, one of the most haunting missing persons cases in American history. As we come to the end of this story, though it is not truly an ending, for there can be no ending until Timothy is found, we are left with more questions than answers. What happened during those 9 hours between the Kalahari checkout and Amy's appearance at the stores in Winnebago? Where did she take Timothy? What did she do with him? Who are the people referenced in Amy's suicide note? Do they exist? Did Amy actually leave Timothy with someone? Or was the note a fabrication, a final act of cruelty designed to torment those she left behind? What was the significance of the Sterling and Rock Falls area? Why had Amy made unexplained trips there in the months before Timothy's disappearance? Who did she know there? Why hasn't anyone come forward? If Timothy was left with a family, why haven't they seen the news coverage, the age progression photos, the appeals for information? Are they deliberately hiding him? Do they not know his true identity? And the question that haunts Jim Pitzen most of all, why hasn't Timothy tried to contact his family? If he's alive, if he remembers his father, if he knows his own name, why hasn't he called, written, reached out in any way? We taught him how to dial 911, Jim has said. We taught him his address, his phone numbers. Why hasn't he tried to call? The silence is deafening. It has lasted for more than 13 years, and with each passing day, the chances of breaking it grow smaller. And yet, there are cases where missing children have been found after years, even decades. There are stories of kidnapped children who grew up and discovered their true identities as adults. There are families who waited and hoped and prayed, and who were eventually reunited with loved ones they thought they would never see again. In 1991, J.C. Dugard was kidnapped at age 11. She was held captive for 18 years before being found in 2009. In 2013, 3 women who had been kidnapped in Cleveland, Amanda Berry, Gina DeJesus, and Michelle Knight, escaped after being held for nearly a decade. In countless other cases, missing persons have been found long after hope seemed lost. Timothy Pitzen could be one of those cases. He could be alive, living somewhere under a different name, waiting to be found or waiting for the right moment to find his way home. Or he could be gone, his fate sealed in those 9 missing hours, his final resting place hidden in a meadow, somewhere in northwestern Illinois, never to be discovered. We don't know. We may never know. But until there is proof, one way or the other, the search will continue. the family will hold on to hope. And the questions will remain unanswered, hanging in the air like the silence that has defined this case from the beginning. On a Wednesday morning in May 2011, a 6-year-old boy waved goodbye to his father in a school parking lot. He was wearing green shorts and a t-shirt, carrying a Spider-Man backpack. He had brown hair and brown eyes and a smile that could light up any room. His name was Timothy James Pitzen. He was a happy kid, a curious kid, a kid who loved the zoo and water parks and Matchbox cars. He had his whole life ahead of him. And then, in the span of 3 days, he vanished, taken by his own mother on a journey that ended in tragedy and mystery, left somewhere with someone or alone, in a place that no one has been able to find. His father still waits for him. His grandmother still writes to him. His aunt still searches for him. They believe he is alive. They believe he will come home. But the truth is, no one knows what happened to Timothy Pitzen. No one knows if he is alive or dead, safe or in danger, aware of his true identity, or lost in a life he doesn't remember. The only person who knew the answer was Amy Fry Pitzen, and she took that answer with her to a motel room in Rockford, Illinois, where she left behind a note that promised her son was safe but would never be found. So far, that promise has proven true. Timothy has not been found, but hope remains. And as long as there is hope, the search will continue. Someone, somewhere, knows what happened to Timothy Pitzen. Someone, somewhere, might be able to bring a father's long nightmare to an end. That someone might be you. Thanks for being here and listening. Don't forget to hit the bell for our latest stories. Stay safe and take care with your loved ones.